A real quick PSA, if you haven't already, be sure to buy the 2 platinum packs off the Dawn store, because I'm not sure how long they'll be here for. And if you want to, use code ODO at checkout. How's it going, guys? Doe here, and today I'll be showing you guys how to kill Winterhorn's Grave with every single weapon in under 3 minutes. And there will also be timestamps and builds in the description for every single weapon, so if you want to, check that out. And for added challenge, I'm not using any consumables in this video except for one singular concussive grenade on repeaters. But let's go ahead and discuss the first build, which is going to be for the chain blades. And for the chain blades, I'll have the Hellion chain blades. I said chain blades a lot there, but Hellion chain blades with the Cool Rift Strike special and the Serrated Blades mod. So these are pretty much my preferred specials and mods for chain blades on most fights, especially this fight. And for the Cool Rift Strike, I use this to double dodge attacks. So basically, I'll dodge into an attack with my dash, and then right after that, I'll use my Rift Strike to get another iframe easily. Because if you guys don't know, if you haven't noticed yet, Winterhorn's Grave has some attacks that are pretty scuffed. And I'm saying that because some attacks, if you dodge the wing swipe, it'll then send out these icicles that you can't dodge because you dodged the wing swipe, so you basically just get hit for free. So to counteract that, the chain blades let me dodge really quickly twice, so I pretty much get 2 free dodges, and it's just a lot safer. But for the build itself, I have the Hellion headpiece, the Koshai chest piece, the Reza gloves, the Koshai feet, and the perk economy will be +6 Aetheric Attunement, Conduit, Overpower, Predator, Rage Hunter, and Weighted Strikes. So Cunning got a nerf recently, so instead of using Cunning, I prefer to go with the Weighted Strikes, since Weighted Strikes gives me flat stagger damage and the ability to interrupt attacks with my heavy attack on the chain blades if I'm at +6. And the rest of the perks will be explained later on with weapons that can use them a bit better. But for chain blades on this fight, the main thing you want to do is try and proc Serrated Blades as much as possible. And by the way, to proc an ability just means to activate it. But for proccing Serrated Blades, you want to use your light attack as much as possible, and that's the best way to activate it or proc it. You can also use your Cool Rift Strike to land it. Once you land your Cool Rift Strike, that will give you a chance to proc Serrated Blades as well. And now I noticed that there's a bit more fluidity in chain blades. So when you go into a Cool Rift Strike, it'll sometimes let you combo into a Serrated Blades attack, which before, or not Serrated Blades, a Swinging Blades attack, and before it wouldn't let you do that as often. So I think that they're working on fixing that, because that is a big thing I like to see happening on chain blades. And that's pretty much all the tips I can give, aside from just using your dash to dodge attacks, but also use your Rift Strike to dodge attacks faster, because the iframe on your dodge is a bit delayed, whereas on Rift Strike it's pretty instant. It's actually much closer to an actual dodge, and if anything it is actually an actual dodge, just a bit different. The next weapon I'll be discussing will be the repeaters, and this build's a bit different than everything else just because repeaters have a lot different perk economy than other weapons. And the build itself has repeaters with the Inferno Barrel, Salvo Chamber, Captain's Grip, Searing Prism, and Lucky Magazine for the modulation of the repeaters. And the build itself has the Reza Helmet, Drast Chest Piece, Hellion Gloves, and the Koshai Feet with the Drast Lantern. And by the way, Drast Lanterns will be in every single build, so I'm going to stop saying that just because it's in every single build, it's a good lantern, use it. But the perk economy is going to be Aetheric Attunement at +6 with Conduit, Molten, Predator, and Rage Hunter. And in this build I'm using Molten just because it's a lot harder to proc Evasive Fury on this fight than it is for Molten. Some attacks don't proc it, such as the Icicles, they don't proc Evasive Fury like they should, and Molten's a lot easier to maintain from just hitting it and picking up the orbs. So that's my preferred method for repeaters. Now for playing repeaters on this fight, what you want to do is proc Molten as fast as you can and keep proccing it and picking up the orbs, because every orb you pick up will increase the duration of the Molten attack speed and movement speed buff you get. And you also want to pick apart to focus so you can try and break it and get a really good opportunity to do more DPS once it's staggered. Which this build doesn't have overpower, so it's not a big deal to do that, but staggering Behemoth with part breaks does give you a really safe time to do DPS. So pick apart, focus it. I went with the face and I think the wing, but mostly the face, just because once you break the head, it cuts off the antlers or severs them, and it's in a pretty long stagger state for a while. And this is a good thing because if it's staggered, it can't hit you, which means you can't lose Predator during that duration. Moving on, the next weapon is the most balanced in the entire game, which is going to be the Hammer. And the build for the Hammer is the exact same thing as the Chain Blades, except instead of using Weighted Strikes, we're using Cunning, and that is what we're swapping out. For the Hammer Special mod, I'm using the Mighty Landbreaker and the Extended Clip. And a really cool new thing you can do is if you jump and you use the Mighty Landbreaker in the air, it'll actually deploy it much quicker while you're moving. So this now replaces the old way of jumping and using the blast attack, and instead you jump and use a Mighty Landbreaker while moving really quickly. So this is a really good thing to do if you're playing solo, when you don't have to put out more buffs to your teammates, and this makes it a lot easier to deploy it while moving and being mobile. So I like this a lot. And I also like that the hammer feels pretty good on this fight, which it feels good on most fights because it's really strong, but it feels good on this Scrave fight just because Scrave has a pretty rough interrupt to execute properly, and in most cases you're going to trade. But the hammer has a double evasive blast, I guess, attack that is somewhat safe for interrupting this fight, and it just makes it a lot just better because you don't get hit, you don't lose Predator, you get more damage. So the hammer on this fight is really nice, but the main thing here is to use Aether Slam as much as you possibly can. And if you see it's bubbly in the face, what I would do is do a Aether Jump attack, Aether Jump Slam attack, and try and land it on the face, because that will pretty much guarantee you a stagger. If not, just do a primed frontal swing, and that will also guarantee you a stagger in most cases, especially if you're solo. Alright, now for the last two weapons I didn't do so hot with, and that's going to be the sword, the warpike, and the axe. So for the sword, I used a build that had conditioning on it just because I wanted it, but I have the Hellion sword with the Valiant Overdrive special and the Reactive Hilt mod. And for my armor, I have the Reza helmet, Koshai chest piece, Reza gloves, and the Karabac feet. And this lets me get +6 Etheric Attunement, Conduit, Overpower, Predator, Rage Hunter, along with a +3 Conditioning and Cunning. So I wanted Conditioning just because the sword can be kind of brutal if you don't have Conditioning on it. And maybe brutal is not the right word for it, but it does make it harder to play, especially when you use an attack which is the repeating elements, which is going to be the double heavy attack followed by repeating light attacks until you run out of stamina, which is a very good attack if you're in overdrive and a behemoth is, I guess, immobilized. Now, going into the fight on Scrave, it's not really a bad fight with the sword, it's just that it was a bit of bad RNG on my part, which the fight started off pretty well. I did trade with Scrave during its interrupt, which is going to probably happen most of the time. You can probably hit it without getting hit, but it's really hard to perfect that. But aside from that, the RNG happened whenever it put down 2 of the Blizzard mechanic type things. They're not a big deal, but they do obscure your vision and they make it hard to dodge attacks because you can't see them. So that is sort of what played in like the fight being kind of rougher. But overall, the sword's a really good weapon for this fight, and it does give you pretty good damage and it gives you pretty good stagger damage, which is really nice on this fight because staggering it makes it just a lot easier. And now it's time for the struggle bus weapon that is going to be the Warpike. Warpike was insanely hard to get a really quick kill time on with Winterhorn Scrave. It took me, I think, 20 hunts to do this properly, and it took me like messing around with builds, all kinds of stuff. Initially I had Savage in my build, didn't like it that much, but my final build was pretty much the same as the previous build, with the only difference being I'm using the Warpike, and for the Warpike special I had Concussive Payload, and the mod is Balanced Spearhead. Now for the special you could use Savage Wellspring, but that's only if you're comfortable booping Winterhorn Scrave with a roll left attack, a standing still right click, or a roll right attack. Personally, I'm not playing the fight enough to understand how to do that yet properly, so instead I went with the safe route, which is Concussive Payload. As for the actual fight, you'll see me using a light attack followed by a right attack and then alternating between the two repeatedly. I'm doing that because my mod is Balanced Spearhead, and this makes it so I increase my damage dealt by 3% every single time I alternate between attacks up to a max amount of 5 stacks because that's how it works. So I'm alternating between my light attack and my heavy attack in that order because that gives me the most damage, and it's also probably the safest for me to dodge out of, which you're also going to see me pretty much pausing between my attacks to make sure it's safe to initiate another attack. That is what I had to do to make sure I don't lose Predator throughout the majority of the fight, which I'm pretty sure I kept it for either the whole fight or the majority of it, which is the goal. Because this fight can be kind of hard to dodge, which by the way, if you want to dodge it a lot easier, when it's in the air, I suggest looking into the sky to see when it's about to hit the ground. That's how I started dodging it, because going off of either timing or going off of sound cues wasn't really that simple because it has variations between those attacks. So look in the sky and see when it's about to land is my advice for that. And other than that, my only other advice is to try and save a missile for when it goes in the sky and it can be booped. Which the missile can be either really weak or really strong, it doesn't matter. Just save a missile because that will boop it if you're at the proper distance. Which, to boop it, you should back up from Winterhorn Scrave because the activation window is pretty late in the actual like the flying animation. So back up so you have enough time to actually boop it before it hits you and doesn't let you boop it instead. And finally, we're at the last weapon, which will be the axe on Winterhorn Scrave, which was actually pretty much almost as hard for me as it was using the Warpike, in all honesty. But anyway, for the build, it's going to be the exact same thing as the last two builds, but instead we're using the axe with the Grim Onslaught special and the Volatile Axe Core mod. And for the gear, the only thing I changed was I swapped out the Pred Cell, or one Pred Cell, for Molten, and a cutting cell for molten as well, just to have more attack speed, just because I know I'm not going to be using cutting that much on the axe, and I would instead rather have the attack speed. And a really awesome change that y'all might not have experienced yet is that the Grim Onslaught special now rewards you more meter gain if you catch it whenever it's landing after you hit a behemoth. So if you throw it at a behemoth, when it's landing, it'll give you a really big mark that indicates where it's going to land. If you catch it, you get a pretty sizable amount of meter charge for the axe. And it sounds cool, it just feels good. It's a really amazing change, and it's just a really small change that makes the axe a lot more fun to play now. And honestly, it makes you feel like a budget Draven from League, which is pretty sick. If we ever get like an exotic axe with like 2 of these, that'd be the bee's knees, man. Anyway, playing the axe of Windhorn's Grave was kind of hard, but there is an upside. Windhorn's Grave's attack, which is boopable, is actually a damage threshold first, and then a boopable attack. So initially, it's damage threshold, and it turns into an unstable attack when it's flying at you. So whenever it puts out its wings, you'll see like marks on its face, right? To interrupt that, just do enough damage. With the axe, Grim Onslaught does that damage instantly in solo, so it's really easy to actually interrupt it out of that before it ever starts, saving you a ton of time. But with this upside, there's also a major downside, which is the fact that the axe is really slow on this fight, because Windhorn's Grave is very active. So if you can stagger it, the axe can do crazy damage. If you can't stagger it, the axe does not do that well because it takes forever to actually get your charges off to even get energy. But this is helped out by the new change to Grim Onslaught, which does make it a bit more bearable. But overall, the fight is amazingly fun. There is one big downside though, and that is the fact that if you dodge an attack, you will still get hit in some cases, and that is not okay. It's not fun. I do not like those kind of mechanics. In this case, it might be overlooked, but if you dodge a wing swipe on Windhorn's Grave, it'll pretty much still hit you in some instances, and that is not fun. And what's hitting you is icicles, and they can either hit you for damage or freeze you, which it's just, it doesn't feel very good. But that's like my only downside with this fight so far is that, which will probably get fixed just because it doesn't feel very good to play against. But anyway, y'all, that's the end of this video. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you want to subscribe to this channel for more Dolls content. And if you guys don't know already, I am a Dolls partner on Twitch, so I do stream this game pretty often. I answer questions live. I'm a very interactive streamer. So if you have any questions you want to get answered live, that's a great place to have it done. But the last thing is, I do also have a support credit code on the Epic Games Store. So if you buy anything in the Epic Games Store or in Dauntless, use my code, which is going to be ODO, and that will directly support me, and it is mucho appreciated. But anyway, thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.